everyone to today's webinar from the Open Group. You're all very welcome, and I'm very pleased to say we have a great speaker today, Martin Owen, who is CEO of Corso, which is a very active member of the Open Group. And before I hand over to Martin, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping issues. Firstly, we would encourage you to ask questions. Obviously, this is a really good opportunity to engage with people, Martin Owen. The best way to submit a question on WebEx is to use the text QA facility. If you do a question into that facility, please can I ask you to address it to all or all participants. That way everyone gets to see the questions that are being submitted. And what we intend to do is we will go through those questions at the end of the presentation, so please submit them as we go through. Also, this event is being fully recorded, so if for any reason you have to leave early, or if you experience any technical difficulties, then a full recording will be available. And then we'll get an email which will contain a URL where you can access that recording. I also believe that Martin is making his slide deck available after this presentation. And in the same email that's referred to, there is a URL in there where you can actually download his slides. So, Martin, if you're ready, can I hand over to you?
Yep, fine. Yes, great. Okay, thank you, Simon. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Thank you for taking the time out to come to this presentation. So this is a topic I'm very passionate about, and we're going to be covering road mapping and looking at how that applies to both the business world and the IT world, but also how we construct road maps using techniques like Archimate and TOGAF. A little bit myself and where I'm. So our co-founders of Corso. Corso was created in 2011, based out of the UK, also offices in the US and Australia. Architect for just over 20 years. My history is with Popkin Software, starting off with modern tools and enterprise architecture tools, primarily a tool called System Architect, which then from Popkin into Telelogic, which is a company, and then from Logic into IBM. And at IBM I became the product for enterprise architecture, and then moved into a role looking after portfolio management, which was an umbrella term really for strategic planning. So that's looking at the whole, adding ideas, those ideas, mapping to enterprise architecture, and then does into business initiatives. So really for looking at the tooling around that and how to construct those scenarios. Our roles in standards and standards bodies. So I'm doing a lot of work now at the Open Group. So now the committee and the team are on mappings between enterprise architecture with Archimate and UML, the Unified Model Language from the OMG. So we're both active within the Open Group and OMG, and I also helped create the standard for business modeling, which is the process modeling notation, BPMN. Okay, as I mentioned, we're back in 2011, we were created. We were from the former IBM product team for System Architect. So we understand tools very well, and we understand how to fit tools together. We understand lots of the methods and frameworks behind those tools, including things like DODAF, TOGAF, DAF, obviously Archimate, which we're heavily involved in now. Our company to actually start to look at how we address the disconnect between teams and the rest of the business. It's really what we're focusing on. And this is really see road mapping as being extremely important to be able to communicate information architecture to the right stakeholders in an organisation. So we have a network. Obviously, we have offices. We have a network of associates and expertise in the world. We're also pre-IBM business partners. So we do resell IBM tooling. We put our own tools into that tooling to add value. And we both on a product basis, but also on a cloud. So quite uniquely, we're able to offer the rational products from IBM on our cloud, so you can actually rent those on a monthly basis. So what are we going to talk about today? So a little overview on what road mapping is about, how we've been with it, what it means, some of the concepts behind a roadmap, so what types of things should you be interested in, the keys or techniques you need to understand that help you create both strategic business and IT roadmaps, supporting meta model. So this is very important because to be able to construct consistent roadmaps, you need to understand a meta model, to understand how to create a model that can give you repeatable maps, capability roadmaps, IT roadmaps. Then we'll have specific viewpoints or views of architecture, which help you understand things over time. And then we'll look at lessons we've learned. And these are lessons learned in various projects, various initiatives, various pieces of work that we've been doing over the last 20 years. So it's going to be a bit of education for you. Sure, out there as well, you've got ideas as well, so hopefully link into me on LinkedIn, link into Corso, we can share some of these concepts and feed those back into groups like the Open Group. Okay, so we've been with a number of customers. Now, the customers we work with, normally strategic, yet large customers. They're a globe, so they're in every country. Every organisation that we're talking to at some level is in around roadmaps. Really, the output that the organisation sees. So these are the things that need to be looked at from an enterprise architecture perspective. So lots of building roadmaps in PowerPoint and Excel. Their work, they have to be reinvented every time and repopulated. Enterprise architecture gives us a basis for building roadmaps in a formal manner, in a structured manner, and a repeatable way. Now, take a number of forms. So we can build roadshow off the business strategy. We can build maps just to show individual projects or programs of work. We can look at different life cycles. I'll explain what those are as we move through. And then obviously technology and application roadmaps. Out of the box, if you take something like TOGAF and MATE, they both need to be enhanced to support full road mapping. So some concepts we're going to be talking about in this presentation are not in the core TOGAF or ArchiMate specifications. Another work that we're doing with Corso within the Open Group to promote some of these capabilities. So, one of the biggest lessons we've learned over time is that building architecture for architecture's sake doesn't get you very far. So you know to build architecture with a reason in mind. Maps are a great reason of why you should be doing architecture. In fact, roadmaps are used both in enterprise architecture to explain where architecture is on some time horizon, and they're used as part of portfolio management for discussing the cost, the resources, and the risk behind the architecture. So maps can be viewed by various stakeholders in the organisation. They don't need to understand TOGAF or ArchiMate to look at a roadmap and understand it. So what we do is we lead with roadmaps. Demonstrate a roadmap. Looks like we show the attributes or the properties that are required to create those roadmaps. And then we enterprise architecture and portfolio management and how it can be used to support the processing roadmaps. And this is about doing it in a formal manner, and it's about doing things in a cost manner and in a repeatable manner. Let's look at TOGAF. On the right-hand side here, TOGAF ADM, process or method for constructing enterprise architecture. So it's a set of guidelines and a set of principles. Iterations you'll go through when you're actually planning out your architectures. These are demonstrated with the loops that we've got on the screen. So context iteration. So the reason why we're building architecture. so also the vision and the strategy. On the right wheel, you've got B, C, D, and E. You're looking at creating the architectures themselves. We go through iterations and life cycles of creating architectures. Importantly, if you look bottom there for E and F, we talk about duties and solutions. So while doing things, projects are going to kick off, terms of work, and migration planning in F is how we're going to actually get to build those pieces of work from where we are today. So these important areas, F, certainly roadmaps can help. And the area where looks like Archimate and Archimate 2 is into its own. So R2 helps us with a lot of views around building a roadmap and building a transition plan. They do those roadmaps themselves. I'll show you why. So some of the techniques on the side we're looking at here. So enterprise modeling, looking at business strategy, process, organizational structure, locations, applications or systems and technology. These important types of things to be developed. Writing documentation and reporting on those aspects. What about all of those aspects? It can all have time applied to them. We can put time business process. It can have a start and end date of when that business process starts or ends. We can put application components having start and end dates on them. Similarly with technology, similarly with capabilities. Any architecture can have temporal properties associated with them. Change within the ADM on the right-hand side. Those iterations of change are slower than are in the software development world. So if we do code changes in the software world, it's different to putting change into a governance process around enterprise architecture. So that handles things in a slightly different way when we're going through change and affects our roadmaps. That actually draws how we build roadmaps. The others we do when we look at strategic planning is we look at life cycle here of change, but we look at that in the context of different options and different recommendations and different initiatives. Okay, so it's very different to the software world where people are used to merging and branching. So the main output from what we do in this environment is conceptual blueprint. And in fact, themselves are blueprints within an organization. Then we see the world with applied to it. Transition and decide between different blueprints and we're going to choose as we move forward in terms of options. Well, we need timelines and roadmaps as well as the current EA techniques. We also need to look at costs over time as well, and that's an important dimension to roadmapping. So, look at different implementation migration patterns. Yep, these are pretty important. I mentioned a lot of the work around roadmaps or concerning yourself with migration planning and implementation and governance inside TOGAF. We're also concerned with opportunities and solutions. So what we see on the screen is an example of, on the left here, we may start off with EA version 1.2. This is our line enterprise architecture view of the world. That could be our state. And at the bottom here, constraints and defined guidelines. So this could be a program of work that comes in where we look at implementing a new business process. Now, you can do at the top there is create X and Y, and these could be alternative options. So they target states. Current architecture, which shows our processes, locations, organizational structure, data, technology, etc. We can put options of that, X and Y, and then Y is the option we're going to choose and create a new baseline architecture, 1.3. And that's the baseline we can publish to our organization. From that, we can start to look at, if we have maybe an outsourcing initiative that comes in, we can look at alternatives A and B. And we can branch into B2 and B1. So those could be proposals or evaluations for change in our organisation for outsourcing. So this is available. EA 1.3, D at the bottom there. Yeah, we could incorporate feedback. So it could be something like we want to undertake an application portfolio management or rationalisation exercise. So we can say to the rest of the organisation, get feedback about which applications are important and which ones aren't, the owners are, what the case is being used for. And D, we can then decide we're going to create a refresh and version 2 of our enterprise architecture. We have to use options B2 and B1. And then from 2 here, of the architecture, we might have an acquisition that we go through. So we're going to EA, how we're going to migrate business processes and capabilities from another organisation, along with technology infrastructure that's there. I'm going to create. So that gives an example of the different types of migration patterns we've got when we're looking at things over time. And it's important to have this context as we move forward inside the presentation. So Quad referred to this as current state versus future state architectures. Some people call it a federated architecture, as is to be. There's lots of different terminology for this. This slide shows a very simple as is versus to be scenario. This time you'll see is that in version 1.3 we create an alternative X and an alternative Y, both different type capabilities and different type of architecture and differences. And based on in Y, we decide that our chosen path forward. Okay, so just examples of how you'd use as is and to be architectures. So when we talk about mapping, I'll show you some different types of road mapping. Road mapping covers a wide spectrum of views and information. These are things that are important. Look at the concept of a road map. So it's on the left-hand side here. We've got called a plateau. And a plateau is available in both GAF and Archimate. Obviously, before plateaus were available, we refer to these types of things as workspaces or patterns. Important, and I'm going to take you through each of these concepts as we go through the presentation. Gaps are important. They look at how you're going to get from one state to another, how you're going to transition from A to B. A workspace or plateau represents a piece of architecture or a well-defined group of architectural assets at a particular moment in time. A gap is the gap between one plateau and another. Workspaces are units of work. The things that we'll do, and they will help us from one plateau to another plateau via a gap. And a work could be an object, it can complete a program of work, it could be an individual task, it could be exercise. Work package is a unit of work with a start and end date. Again, work packages are part of Archimate. You can model them in views. The concept here is a milestone. So a milestone is not in Archimate and is not in TOGAF. But is really a specific gateway or a moment in time in a work package timeline that will A to B. So normally a work package will be made up of specific milestones that you want to hit to ensure you're on target and that you're making transition to the end of that work package. And it might normally have a delivery date. It might be something like gather requirements, define, design, build product, test product. So you can have a set of milestones. Any piece of work should have a set of milestones. We've got life cycles. Cycles allow us to specify the behavior of any piece of architecture at any moment in time. So it's cycle state. So in service or out of this? Is it sunset? Is it being prototyped, delivered as a piece of training? So every organization that I've spoken to, their own set of life cycle states, and even their company, they have different life cycle states representing the type of work that they're doing, and the life cycles have meaning to them. And the cycle states themselves are something you need to standardize. So when you look at road mapping and different types of road mapping, quite often things like application portfolio management will have a well-defined set of states that you'll go through to manage your application portfolio. Things like variants and versions are important. So if you move your architecture over time, you create a set of components, architectural components that sit together of a version, important in terms of how you baseline things moving forward. So if you get an alternative X versus an alternative Y, having an understanding of what the baseline components and versions are is important. And the other big driver on here is costs. I think in terms of resource costs, it might be in terms of work package costs. Yeah, there's a whole range of costs that affect what you do. Again, we'll hit concepts as we move further through the presentation. This slide here shows us some of the important capabilities for road mapping. If you get tooling, these are things you should be able to do with your tooling. If the tool do these types of things automatically, it'd be more difficult for you to construct roadmaps. What we're concerned with here is compare. So if we can get current state versus future state, we want to see the differences between those two states. If alternative X versus alternative Y, what's between the two? If we're merging two organizations, we need to difference them. So to compare is very important. The other aspect to road mapping is looking at heat maps. So we look at how do we understand the state of something over time. Doing that is either by color coding it, so using red, amber, green, so RAG status indicators. It'll be changing the shape of things, changing the depictions of things over time. Be able to run analytics against roadmaps and model content is crucial. Version management, that's important, in which versions we're on, so we can track the history. And that's into audit trailing, being able to look at who's done what, who's changed what over time, which is why people change things. Understand that behaviour in order to build a roadmap. And the other one onto here is impact assessment. So what's the impact of changing something? So again, although the roadmap might show us some detail, we need to be able to drill into that roadmap and look at the impact of a milestone being delayed, or presenting one architecture versus another architecture. Looking at this is crucial in terms of looking at the impact of change. Okay, most things that we change, driven by business motivation. So motivation is driving the need for us to change things. It's business motivation tells us that we need to create a current state versus future state, or alternative X or alternative Y. So both F and Archimate have one model, business motivation. So this is the business motivation model. R also has its business motivation built into it as well. You can also requirements for change. So the DM wheel that we looked at a few slides ago, right at the heart of that was a requirements piece. You can model requirements for change. Also track them. So if you're going into with enterprise requirements environment, you can use specific requirements management tools to manage the traceability between requirements. So those do change. You may want to track them as a discipline in their own right, and you can use tools to do that. In response to what you're going to change, you can model change and describe the change in a work package. And then maps themselves, these are the anticipated or the actual timeline of change that's required to any particular asset in your architecture. So showing is a roadmap is showing us something over a specific time period. Look at that as we move through. So, the motivation modelling is important. Really knowing about Archimate. Archimate now supports the concept of work package gaps and requirements, and all can be seen graphically through a view. And what is, we've extended Archimate with specific support for workspace management and requirements management. So let's look at the simple TOGAF meta model. So up here, you can see requirements, gaps, and work packages. And that's with all objects. So they're associated with processes, locations, data, applications, technology components, platforms, etc. So those steps already exist. So let's have a standard Archimate meta model. So this is a sketch of the model itself. So items in a yellow colour on here. You'll see that there's a plateau on the left-hand side. Okay, with a gap. Realises deliverables. Deliverables realise work packages. Added into this concept is the concept of a work package milestone. So a work package can use work package milestones. Package milestones themselves can deliver. There can be gates to deliver pieces of work that can go one or many work packages. We've concept on here of plateau linking to workspace. That's really a physical So obviously what we do at Corso is we support tooling, and a workspace is a tooling capability inside IBM's rational system architecture. It supports workspaces and dividing things up into pods. Okay, but it really goes to a plateau. This is how we do the meta model. What is a workspace? So a workspace is really a container of artifacts. So together, a complete model, but it brings a set of information for a moment in time. It spans all modeling domains, so we can use it for a number of things. We can use it as a dedicated project. We can use it for as-is and to-be architectures. Use a workspace to box things, so go and play with something to test out an idea to see if it works or not. We can base space, and the base itself is the root of workspace, is the root of other workspaces. So we can use it for doing some detailed comparison later on. And each workspace we can associate it with things like change requests. So these things in a governance lifecycle. I'm not too much workspaces, but a works now really akin to a plateau. As I go on. Now, Arch itself has a nice implementation migration view. We can't see this example that clearly on the screen, but we do have a white paper on the Corso website which allows you to go in and download and have a look at some examples. But we do Archimate and look at the point, migration diagram. As I mentioned, plateaus represent workspaces. So the box you're seeing, the cubes on the screen here, plateaus, and then those plateaus. And deliverables, and we're associated with deliverables. So the thing here is that this implementation and migration view can actually document your repository or workspace or plateau structure for how you're building your enterprise architecture. So I'm quite passionate about this. I think every time we should do a piece of enterprise architecture work, we ensure as an organisation out our innovation and migration viewpoint to describe our different architectural plateaus, different workspaces, different packages of work. So we can build a model view, we can describe them using Archimate Describe, documenting our enterprise architecture strategy. Okay, workers, discrete pieces of work, they have a start and end date. Work packages aren't necessarily projects, but they can represent pieces of work at different levels. We're doing a lot of work ourselves of mapping work packages into, so you can talk to the PMO, program manager, things, and we can actually brand work packages into as well. We can add milestones into these. So as I mentioned before, milestones show us the status or the gates for given pieces of work. So is a new view. Okay, now there are standards out there. So what we've tried to do is reuse things where possible, rather than reinvent the wheel. So in MODAF, an early version of MODAF, I think it's MODAF 1.1, which is Ministry of Defence architectural work in the UK. Had something called an ACV2. An ACV2 is an acquisition view, and they showed a timeline of work packages in a very nice way. That view then reused in 2, so it's now part of DODAF 2, the Department of Defence Architectural Framework. Taken that and reused that and renamed what were systems to projects, and we've been milestones. I'll add that in a second. So this is what it looks like. Moving down the page here, set boxes on the left-hand side. Packages. If you remember, these can be projects, programs, text, anything that we like on here. We show down the screen. At the bottom of the page here, we have a time bar or a time legend that's showing time going from left to right. Instance, we're looking at 2011 to 2013. So we're at time going from left to right in this example. The large pies that you see on the screen are what we call milestones. So those that represent the gateways for a particular work package. They're automatically plotted out for us along. We can note dependencies between those milestones as well. So if one milestone relies on another being complete, we can represent that. The milestones themselves represent dates or moments in time. Now we've also noticed that we've got segments to tie. Important. Segments to the pie can be configured yourselves, and their status. Okay, so different ways you can set status. We put a few in as an example. So things like we've got cost. Is it high, medium, low, or it's not resource high, medium, low, or unknown? Whether it's strategic or not. Whether it's high, strategic, medium, low. Lots of other statuses you can put in there. The more statuses you add to a milestone, the more segments you get to the pie. So it goes on there are things like MOD gates. It could be lines of business and their status. Like you organise training at that milestone. Have you delivered tests to the test people? Have you QA'd? Have you done whatever? Those are configurable. Also associate cost as well. Now we can associate not just with things like milestones, but also with the complete work package itself. And with deliverables that are affected by those work packages. So things you're delivering at the end of the day. You can obviously import costs in, because you may not be managing cost in your enterprise architecture environment, so it's vitally important you've got access to some of those costings either in project management tools or portfolio management tools, or just from Excel. Okay. I mentioned cycles earlier on. So life are really important. Modelling, and we look at as-is and to-be architectures, looking at plateaus on their own and looking at work packages and milestones isn't enough. What we do is we need to look at each plateau in its entirety, have a look at the life cycles of particular meta objects, architecture, and moving over time. So life cycles show us the life cycle states that an object moves through over time. Life cycles may also relate to milestones. And I'll show you examples of this in a second. But for example, we take an application component. An application component, so it might be Salesforce.com. So we use Salesforce.com into our organization. So it's got a plan date, and a plan end date. It might have an implementation date, start and end date, a deployment start and end date, and then when we expect to retire it. So those example life cycles that we've got inside architecture. One of the pieces of work for the life cycle, like implement, that gets into a work package with a series of milestones that kicks off that work. So you can see how this is all integrated with each other to give you a complete view of. So let's look at TOGAF and what extend TOGAF. So going a little bit behind the scenes here in terms of the meta model, so you can get an understanding for why the views are created and how they're created. At the bottom here, the things in a very light blue, plateaus, deliverable work packages we've discussed, and gaps, and that space was a IBM Rational System Architect concept. It's very akin to a plateau. And that was in purple here, the concept of a work package milestone. So a work package milestones. And now said is that a work package milestone made to a life cycle state. Let's take a look at life cycle state and what that is. Now, cycle in this meta model here, we've connected to various meta model. This is a finite set, so you can put other things in here. So everything that's inside our architecture in terms of meta objects, yet time associated with them, and can have cycle state associated with them. Here we map to capability, application component, technology component, business press, and location. We could do other things as well. Okay, that we're interested in looking at data. It could be data for life cycle status. Okay, and a life state represents a life cycle. I'll talk about the difference between the two of those in a second. Suffice to say that a life cycle state could be something, as I mentioned, like sunset. It could be deployed, etc. And those into the steps within TOGAF. Also, we've been doing this time, so yeah, we have life cycles. However, I mentioned before, most organisations have their own life cycles and synonyms. In organisations, this often happens. You have one calling a life cycle another one called sunset. So, one is we ship with it. So life cycles, you can customize these and create your own life cycles. Not referring too much to tooling inside here. You can look at tooling on our website if you want to, but we do cycles with our tools. So here's all of the things that we support. We have two life cycles. We have deployment life cycles. So these are things that you're physically deploying. Tend to be, you might physically deploy a business process. You might physically deploy an application component or a technology component. Usually deploy a location. So the phases they're through, or life cycles they go through, are birth, plan, implementation, production, retired. People have their own. They will have more. They will have less. there are a set of standards on here. The other here is use cycles. So how are we going to use those enterprise architecture assets? This normally comes down to a business viewpoint. So if I'm looking at an application component or a technology component, or even a business process, on my cycles of we're going to plan it from a business perspective, we're going to train people up, then we're going to make it available to our users, then we're going to commission it, and then we're going to sunset it. What you see here is that I've put up there two different types of life cycles, deployment life cycles and usage life cycles. And you can split those into deploying is about physically deploying things, and using them. So you really start to get an IT perspective and a business perspective usage of things. A TOGAF view here, looking at application components as an example, and when cycles to particular applications. So again, if you look at Salesforce.com there, it's got birth, implement, plan, production, retired, life cycles. The things on the side are deployment life cycles. The right-hand side, the list on the right-hand side, are life cycles. So how the business is looking to use them. So you can see the technology can be slightly different. There of life cycle, and types. And what, as I mentioned before, heat mapping is crucially important. So I've got this information in here. What I'm looking to do is to look for anomalies in my architecture, in my views. So here, heat mapping, the same things. This is a 2014 viewpoint. So one thing to remember is that each of these life cycles has a start and end date. Start date for when we deploy it, for when it's born, when we put it into production. They all have some end dates. Say ends up within 2014. This is an analytic. Then if is 14. The object if planning life cycle for 2014 is amber, and then red. It's red. Tired as a life cycle is in 2014. That's from a deployment viewpoint. On the right of the legend there, you'll see things like available, trading, and sunset. So we've got different pen styles. Available, it's got a pen, a dotted for training, and a thick pen for sunset. You start to see here that is by applying analytics for both deployment and use cycles, you look for anomalies between being deployed and when they're planned to be used. Okay, so I see automatically here that HubSpot, for example, on here, 2014 is in production, and it's level, which is a good thing. Okay, at Salesforce.com in 2014 is going through a planning life cycle and a life cycle, which could be a thing as well. I can see there's a bad thing for Concrete 5. It's in planning, also available for usage for business people. So there's an anomaly here that we need to discuss and work out. A little bit of an example of how you use heat mapping on life cycle states. Then we talk plateaus. And coming back to the idea of a plateau. So a plateau is a self-contained unit or piece of architecture that is to describe, again, current state, future state, alternative architectures. So here in this example, we've got an example of the architecture state as in 2014 and the architecture as in 2015, which is the green box. And in sub boxes, we've got different views. So we've got different life cycle states for 2013, 14, 15, 16 within each plateau. And that's important because they have a different view of what the architecture looks like in 2014 than 2015, and the cycle states within the model may reflect that. They may be different. Be able to compare those time slices in different plateaus. So it can get quite complex unless you start to understand and start to map this out with thoughts up front before you start tackling anything like plateaus. etc. Okay, an overall roadmap. What does an overall roadmap look like? We talked about cycles. We've talked a lot about architecture. So the example of a roadmap is one which we ship with our tool set. It's represented inside both Excel, and we also ship it with HTML5, so you can look at this on an iPad. One of the great things putting this type of view into an iPad is then show it to an exec, show it to somebody that's not familiar with architecture in any shape or form, and they'll understand it. So, how this builds up, and what in TOGAF. This is actually a TOGAF model, now shown in a view which is very much a business-oriented view that most could understand. So here we have an organizational unit. So this represents an org unit inside TOGAF. Some of the screen on the left side, you've got related business services to that org unit. We've got mapping from org unit to the milestones inside here. So once we put into our mapping, I did not show inside our meta model, is an org unit, and the roles within that org unit can be responsible for work packages and milestones. So milestones that relate to that org unit here. At the bottom right hand corner, we've also put in there risks and issues. What risks and issues the org unit are concerned with. And then in the middle of the screen here is timeline. So it's going from, in this example here, 2012 all the way through 2022 in core chunks. And what we see here is our set of application components, which are rows, or represented by the rows. Third on there is we can put selected attributes in the first column. So, and this is the key at the top. So the top right one has a key which says strategic yes or no. Then if it colours in the green box next to the application component as being strategic. If it's not, just red. The cost column in the legend, which is less than 5 million, it's green. If it's greater than 5 million, it's yellow. If it's 10 million, it's red. That runs to the cost cell. There's in there as well. But moving across into the life cycle states now, you'll see there's different colours on the timeline. And roadmap key at the top, you'll see there's birth, planning, implementation, production required. And what we're doing automatically is mapping out those cycle states, which you saw, for example, in the application components, directly into this roadmap. And these components are the application components that are related to the business services, which relate to organizational units. Okay, how you'd represent a roadmap to end users. I think a great way of displaying it. And we can do this for anything. We can do it for technology components. We can show business capabilities. Timeline like this. Okay, way of showing roadmaps. So again, remembering that map is associated with time, is what we call a side-by-side view of our architecture. Some people want to look at things visually, and certainly from a more technical community, you may see that are related to each other. So, say in 2013, the view is this. In 2014, I see we've got some components, or I've added components in, and also how they're related to each other. You may want to have things migrate from one state to another. I can use colours. We can use the side view here to get a good view of our architecture over time. Start to limit yourself here. The more you start to look at things in terms of going out 10 years, in terms of a side-by-side view of 10 things, it becomes more difficult. Another looking at a roadmap is just to time slice it. So view of the model. This model cross plateaus as well, by the way. And so I want a timer bar. And is the bar that you're seeing at the top of the screen here. I'll be able to start and end date to that. Look at anything that's either in service or out of service, or applies to a particular cycle. but within a slider bar and have things fade in or out. So you're getting a snapshot at a moment in time based upon a cycle. That's just another popular view. Okay, moving forward, as you move to strategic planning, you then need to look at roadmaps in terms of how you connect up both the enterprise architecture community and the port management community. You can start to look at taking resources, taking assets, move across into a full-blown portfolio management environment, including moving life cycles across the states of things, application components, resources, org units, and putting a tool where you can start to look at things like benefits realization, applying resource to those. Look at managing change at a wide group of people. It's also important in terms of managing roadmaps and managing time. So again, I'm not too heavily on the tooling support here. Suffice to say, there are lots of tools that can do this type of thing. And so also, what lessons have we learned with roadmaps? Some maps drive real value from the architecture. When you were looking at the spreadsheet earlier on and the side-by-side views, those are the things that the business community and certainly IT leaders want to see in terms of value from the architecture. They don't want to see a massive 1,000 models. Okay, and telling them how hard it has been to construct those models. You need to show the value of the architecture. Roadmaps are a good way to do that. Also, analytics and heat maps are another good way. Mapping out positive strategy. So I mentioned earlier on, it makes a great or add value to you in terms of the implementation migration view. You need to map out that strategy. You can map out the repository strategy quite early on. You start to either one repository with lots of information that's really hard to work through and it becomes unmanageable, or you have lots of repositories that you have no idea what they were created for in the first place. Decide on a set of terms for life cycle states. Okay, so we get to handle synonyms inside our tooling, but you need to set on a common set of terms, because when you communicate and when you run analytics, it's easier to run analytics on one single life cycle states. Mentioned temporal states or time properties can be added to any object inside Archimate. TOGAF. Start to look at roadmaps for anything at all. So it could be business strategy. So you could do things like look at the enterprise direction diagram inside TOGAF and start this business objective, which I've been asked to put in place and model, isn't going to take place until 2021. So you can put that into a and you can timeline that in a roadmap. You wonder how, when you start talking about time and roadmaps, you really need to start talking to the management community within the organisation, because this is where overlap starts to come in between enterprise architecture and portfolio management. You can drive the value by getting those teams to talk to each other through roadmaps. The big lesson here is that make sure output is being presented by the tool, or output is in something like Office, the execs or the operational staff or consumers or stakeholders in the organisation can even understand. So don't frighten them off by showing them a modelling tool in a line. Okay, those are lessons learned. I just want to take questions with, if you want further information, there are white papers on our website. If you want tooling, we have 30-day trials where you either use the software locally yourselves or you just log onto our cloud. It's very quick for us to set you guys up with the cloud and the SaaS environment, and it's corso3.com. So on that, I'm just going to thank you for attending and open up to Simon to take questions.
That's great. Many thanks for that extremely interesting insight into road mapping. Yes, we have some questions in, and if you would like to ask Martin a question, please do write that question into the QA facility now. I just tracked back a little bit in the chat at the moment, Martin, because there was a really interesting question coming in very early on, but I need to see if I can find it very quickly. the gentleman was asking, they've been running enterprise architecture projects in Switzerland, and he represents the company in the US where they'd like to replicate that work. And he was asking, do you have any advice of how you can go about leveraging other people's road mapping work from location to location?
Absolutely. Okay, so the work we've done so far, and we have a really good case study on the work we've been doing with IBM themselves. Lots of geographies. It plays really well into things like plateaus. So you can create plateaus of work for different geographies. So if there's been work that's been done already, if it's been done in a tool that you're using, it makes life easier. It doesn't have to be, but you can certainly model it as a plateau and then start to reuse that work in new plateaus moving forward. So create a implementation migration view and start to map their work.
Great, Martin. Question here from Neil. He's asking, I understand about EA, but can you please elaborate the place of portfolio management in lead with road mapping?
Okay. So portfolio management really allows us to look at the programs of work that we've got on the go, but also look at things like the priorities. So we can look at the prioritization of those pieces of work. So it's more about the resources that are available and working out when best to implement those programs of work. So it's more about the resource management side, the team and the prioritization, than the tech architecture. Where road mapping fits in is if you understand time from an enterprise architecture perspective, or expect things from an enterprise architecture perspective to be in place, then you can communicate that to the PMO world, the management world, so that they can actually better plans than they had been able to previously. So it's complementary.
Excellent. Okay, I've got a question here from Philip, just asking a specific question about one of your slides. Slide 16, he's saying, please can you explain what you mean by a frozen snapshot with pre-populated content?
I'll probably not try. Let me see if I can find that slide for you. So it's about it. So yeah. So effectively, what you can do is you make a plateau of work. So you might 2015 piece of work. You can then decide that that's going to be current state architecture, so you can baseline it. You can do it, yeah, and we call it a frozen baseline, yeah, or you can freeze it like a snapshot, like you do with a mirror image, and then you can move on to create another plateau of work based upon that frozen snapshot. It means sales can change the previous 2015 baseline, but any what you do is in addition to what you've done previously.
Martin, just a question here, just to clarify the roles of Archimate to TOGAF. And he's saying, is the advantage of Archimate over TOGAF in strategic road mapping is that it provides structured tools with specific concepts?
Okay. Well, I would say slightly differently to that. So, the benefit of Archimate is that it gives you a visualization for which to look at the view architecture with, which TOGAF doesn't give you. So, life cycle, it tells you what objects you should create, types of views you should create, but doesn't tell you what they should look like. Archimate less on the telling you how you should create things and more on what the view should look like. It's actually quite complementary. In terms of mapping, Archimate gives you a lot because it gives you an idea of modeling and visualizing work packages, gaps, flows, and deliverables, which you don't really get visually inside TOGAF.
Well, I'm looking at the time. I think we're now coming to the allotted end of the presentation, so this would be a good opportunity to call it a day. If you haven't managed to get to any questions, please feel free to send them through to myself. I know that Martin would be more than happy to answer any questions offline. At this point, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's presentation. Martin, I'd really like to thank you for your time. I think it's been a very insightful presentation. Please do keep an eye out on the Open Group website for future webinars. So, Martin, would you like to just a final word?
Yep. Thank you for all taking your time out today. Again, yep, please free to forward any questions to Simon. I'm happy to answer anything for you.
That's brilliant. Thanks, everyone.